Good afternoon, everybody. I think we'll get started. You can hear me all okay, yeah? In the back? Thumbs up? Or they can't hear me at all? Okay. All right, so my name is Brad Genereaux. I'm going to be talking today about IHE profiles and FHIR and DICOMweb as well. So by day, I'm a product manager with FHIR Healthcare, but you know, as a hobby in my spare time, I do a lot of standards work. So I'm involved. I'm co-chair of HL7 Imaging Integration, co-chair of DICOM Working Group 20 for the integration of imaging and information systems, and also co-chair of Working Group 27 on web technology for DICOMweb. I've been with DICOM for 6 years. Before that, I actually spent 10 years in the Canadian healthcare system as IT analyst, developer, architect, integrator at large. So if you want to reach out to me, you can tweet at me or find me on LinkedIn or what have you. This is track 2 in the imaging track. There are 4 sessions in total, so if you want to learn more about FHIR and DICOM, I'll come back tomorrow. But today we're going to talk what is IHE, its role in interoperability, and understand how FHIR and DICOM fits into that picture. So with that, just a quick show of hands. Who knows what IHE is? All right, so 2/3 or so. And how many of you would say you're IHE experts? Okay, good. Good, so there's lots here. So I'm going to be covering a lot of different domains. I am an imaging person. I'm with FHIR Healthcare. I've been doing imaging for a long time. I do know a lot about various hospital systems, but I'm not going to be an expert in pharmacy as an example, but I will speak to the pharmacy stuff. So first, what is IHE? So it's a framework for interoperability. You could think of it as meta standards or standards for standards. Their role is not to define how you do something, the mechanics of it. Their goal is to profile how you do it in relation to use cases or profiles. So their intent is to bring in DICOM, HL7, and other standards to actually solve real-world problems in hospital systems. The idea is to be able to provide to buyers of software unbiased details about what their system supports, and also really looks at profiling not only within a hospital department, but actually beyond to the organization and cross-enterprises as well. If you know a lot about FHIR, you can equate them similar to the FHIR implementation guide. We take use cases, we define actors, have transactions, and define options on those. When we look at the specific terminology around IHE, they define profiles, which describes the workflow use cases, the standards, and the overall relationship to the for interoperability to achieve it. Integration statements are what vendors provide. So if you go to any vendor of software that you're going out to buy, these should be publicly available, these integration statements, which tells you what profiles they support and in what roles do they support those in. The technical frameworks are the documents that IHE produces, which are volumes of content for both the profiles as well as the transactions within those profiles, which I will go over in a minute. And then connectathons are the pieces that bring together all different vendors where they can interoperate their software with others to make sure that it is truly interoperable. When we look at the process, right, so we look at the problems, we develop integration profiles, we do the connectathons, and then we publish this to a product registry where you can see the level of support that each vendor offers. Look at it a little more simply, we define the problems, we create profiles, we test them, and we publish the integration statements. As we develop, we go through a profile proposal, which usually starts in the August-September timeframe, where they vote upon what they want to tackle for the next year. They create them within a series of meetings. They send them out for public comment, where anyone at large can comment on how the profile was developed and have any more feedback. They move to trial implementation, where they sit for a couple of years, and then it moves to final text when the adoption has been established. So we start at the profile level, which defines a number of actors. So if you think about, I'm going to retrieve, I'll use imaging, I'm going to retrieve a study. There will be 2 actors, the person who requests it and the person that will serve the request. But depending on the use case, there could be more actors at play. There might be a page and identity service. There may be a repository service. There may be a number of different actors. And then within those various actor relationships, we define transactions. We'll say, I'm going to accomplish this task, and what do I need to do it? And we can leverage things like HL7 and DICOM in there to accomplish that. If you go to the IHE website, you can see the technical frameworks for all the different domains, which I'll go over in a couple of minutes. And usually volume 1 is the list of profiles, the problems that they're solving, and then in volumes 2, 3, 4, etc., they would define the transactions. And then they also define national extensions, should there happen to be some. Connectathons, neutral testing events where basically vendors sit at a bunch of different tables, all in one room, no marketing or salespeople, no customers. Really, it's developers, I want to say nerds, but developers testing back and forth to make sure, where they can test back and forth. If something doesn't work on day 1, they have 5 days. They can go and fix it at night, come back the next day, and retest to make sure that the software that they're developing is compatible with the IHE profile. When we compare that against FHIR hackathons or FHIR connectathons, they're a little bit different. IHE connectathons are using predefined test cases against these published formal specifications, whereas connectathons organize around tracks and are a little bit more fluid in terms of the outcomes of the actual events. I talked about the integration statements, so if you go to any vendor XYZ, you should be able to track down their IHE integration statements. And basically what they do is they list, so they list the vendor, the product, the version, the release date, the different profiles that they've implemented, and the actors that they've implemented them within. And then if there are any other options that are not mandatory for development, they can list those as well. And then if they link to any other standards, they can do that. And then the other IHE also maintains a product registry on their website where you can look up this information as well. There are 10 or 11 odd IHE domains. So I've listed them all here. So different committees group around these topics. I put a star beside all of the ones that offer either FHIR or DICOMweb profiles today. So there are 5 in total. So IT infrastructure, patient care coordination, pharmacy, quality research and public health, and radiology. And I'll step through each one of these and go through each of the FHIR profiles in a few minutes. I bolded IT infrastructure because it's important to recognize that that group provides building blocks for some of the other domains to build profiles on top of. There's a few good cases as we step through, you'll see that. And lastly on what is IHE, so IHE is backed by many, many different organizations. So there's just a few that I grabbed off their website. You can see the College of Cardiology, RSNA is behind them. Basically organizations around the world are sponsoring IHE's work. And there are also over 135 member organizations as well, where vendors can come in and participate and then implement and claim support of some of these IHE profiles. Any questions on what is IHE before I move on to the FHIR aspects? All right. So, the IT infrastructure profiles using FHIR, there are, let's say there's 9. Oh no, there's 8 FHIR profiles, and I'll mention one at the end, IUA. So first I'll talk about mobile access to health documents. But before I can do that, I just want to very briefly try to explain the cross-enterprise document sharing model that's developed. And this could take hours and hours, so I'll try to do it in 1 minute or less. The idea behind cross-enterprise document sharing is that I've got 2 different healthcare organizations, and I want to share documents between them. And let's go beyond 2, 3, 4, 10, 20. If I don't want to have to query every single source individually, I can use something called using XDS, where I can create a registry of documents that just as like an index of all the documents available across all institutions, and then I can store the documents in a repository. It could be a repository for my organization, it could be shared with different organizations. And then as a consumer, I could come and query the registry to say, I've got this patient, what documents do you have? And I'll get back a list of the different documents available, and I can query the individual sources using the repository to go and get those documents. It's well established. I think it's probably 10, 12 years old now. It's a very old in terms of modern standards. And it's all using SOAP as the communication mechanism. I've mentioned that because mobile access to health documents is the RESTful FHIR way of leveraging this registry repository model. So using things like document reference, we can use RESTful queries to be able to discover what documents are available, and then retrieve those documents, and then display those documents to the end users. So RESTful interface, yeah, to submit a set of, you could also submit documents as well using IHE. Find the document set, find document entries, and retrieve copies of those individual documents. The next one I'll talk about is ATNA. So ATNA itself is not FHIR enabled primarily, but what they did do very recently was added query capabilities to ATNA using FHIR. So ATNA is really about auditing. So if I access a person's health record, there should be a record somewhere that says I access that health record. And so it's been great for years and years and years where I'm just dumping all this data into presumably, I don't know, a database or a running log of all this information, but I've got no way to look into that. And there's some very interesting things that I can uncover if I look at who's accessing what data. And so, there's a profile that radiology has done that's actually leveraging this extension in FHIR. So really, it's a RESTful way to query for audit events within that ATNA system. Mobile alert communication management. So this is the ability to send essentially text messages to human recipients. It records that we've sent that message, and also we can use a feedback mechanism to say, I acknowledge that I've received this message as well. So this is using FHIR communication request resources to go out and accomplish this. Mobile care services discovery. So you think about the types of care services that are offered by various health organizations. This profile allows you to do that discovery, to say, in a jurisdiction, what health services are offered by what organizations. So I can do those sorts of queries, and again, it's using FHIR resources like organization, healthcare service to actually be able to pull that information back. It could include things like surgery services, antenatal, prenatal care services, primary care services. It could be departments, it could be clinics, it could be urgent care clinics, pharmacies, labs, etc. Mobile cross-enterprise document data element extraction. That's it's a mouthful, MXDE. So if you think about, as you're storing data, you put them in documents and you put them up somewhere. But these documents are structured. And so if, for whatever use case that I actually want to do, I don't really care about the whole document. I want values for it. I can use MXDE to go about and accomplish. Thank you. That's probably easier to read. I can go about using the retrieving those individual items, and you can see the different types: observation, allergy intolerance, condition, as well. Okay. All right. Non-patient file sharing. So very simplistically, sharing files that aren't related to patients themselves. Again, I'll equate this to my world of imaging and DICOM. This would be things like protocol information. So if you're doing a head CT, what are the things you have to protocol at the unit for? You could use something like non-patient file sharing to actually accomplish that. It's really just a file sharing mechanism. But again, it's using FHIR resources of document reference to accomplish this by submitting and retrieving, searching for the files as well. The next two are related. Patient demographics query for mobile. I'll say that a lot of these FHIR profiles have this word mobile in it because it was a way for us to define really good use cases of why REST and why FHIR as opposed to the traditional ways of doing this. Because one could argue and say, well, hey, we already can do patient demographic query by using HL7 version 2 PDQ mechanisms. Why would I want to redo it in FHIR? And the reason why is that the burden of a mobile client to be able to talk HL7 version 2 is quite high. And so a lot of these, when they first started, really targeted the mobile side of things to do that sort of implementation as one of the rationales behind it. So in this case, what we're seeing here is to be able to get demographics for a patient to be used on things like medical devices, on mobile devices as well, and you see that we're using the patient resource to accomplish that. The composite service patient identifier cross-reference for mobile, PICS. It used to be PICS, this is PICS-M. This allows me to say I've got patient domain, my hospital 123. What are the other identities for this patient? So community hospital 456, rural hospital 789, they're all linked together. I can use the PICS-M query using FHIR to discover what's actually there. PICS-M is designed so that it focuses only on patient IDs. So in PICS environments, you don't really care about the patient names or anything else about the patient. You're focusing only on the identities. And so this profile really focuses in on that and not about the rest of what is in patient. And then just a special mention that IUA is a profile developed by ITI, which really profiles OAuth. And the intent is to mirror that of what is done with FHIR as well, with the OAuth protocol as well. So it enables external authorization providers, pluggable authentication, etc. So that is out there now. IHE also has XUA, which is using SAML tokens, as well as I can't remember the one that uses LDAP. There's also another composite user authentication, but IUA really focuses on that OAuth side of things for authentication. So I'll switch to radiology, and I'll cover DICOMweb and FHIR as well. There are 3 profiles in this set, and then one that I'll have a special mention for. Web image capture, web image access, and SOAL. So web-based image capture allows me to acquire images off of, for example, a mobile phone and store it up into an image repository using DICOMweb Store, and it uses PQM for patient identity discovery. Here, I've got a nice little graphic here. I've acquired an image. I'm going to get the patient's full identity, so I make a FHIR query to pull down for this patient. I get back an identifier that I would end up using, complete the study context, and then send it up into the image manager by creating a DICOM header and paste that up and store it. The second profile also would take a very long time to discuss full-fledged. I know a lot about it. We just had in the last hour in IHE Birds of a Feather out by the tables out there, and had some really good conversations about this. The idea of XDS, storing documents inside a registered repository, was extended to include storing imaging studies. But if you think about an imaging study, which could be for a whole slide image, half a terabyte, those systems aren't really designed to store and move about massive amounts of data back and forth. So they use this idea of storing a representation of an index of images into the repository, but then I can go out, pull down that index, and then query the actual image manager and pull down those imaging studies. So the there's a lot of challenges in there. It's not overly performant, as we've seen in the field. I was actually the author of MHDI, which is Mobile Access to Health Documents for Imaging, which leveraged a FHIR-like method using, it now became imaging study, it became imaging manifest, which is a representation of the study that can be stored up and retrieved down, and also translated back and forth with the key object. Since then, just recently in the last couple of months, they've shifted their direction a little bit to focus more on the DICOMweb aspects of using query, using QRS and WADO for retrieval, which is part of DICOMweb, which is something that I talked about this morning. So, but it still allows access to and can back onto XDSI infrastructure as well. So they're really trying to focus on that compatibility with the existing system. Standardized operational log of events started out with SIM, the Society for Imaging Informatics and Medicine, and what they were trying to do there was record all of the events from start to finish of a patient's journey through getting imaging, from the decision to acquire images, to when the order was created, to when they showed up at the hospital to get imaged, from when they sat down in the waiting room, when they were ready to be imaged, all the way through all these different metrics to be able to track down from a business intelligence perspective, where are the bottlenecks for being able to treat the patient. So this leverages the query capability that was added into ATNA to actually be able to offer this ability to do metrics on patients moving through a system. The last one I'll talk about, just a special mention again, it's called Invoke Image Display. This is designed to be able to embed a zero footprint web viewer in a standardized way into an EMR or PACS. Into an EMR or an EHR or a patient portal or things like this. So that it's very easy to be able to say, oh, you want to launch this study, you use a special URL and launch a study that you can embed into some other application. Listening to Smart on FHIR, it sounds very smart on FHIR S, and I will probably try to pick Josh's brain sometime during this week to see where the synergy lies there, which I think is really fascinating. So if you think about trying to put imaging into an application that's hard, IID is really there to try to help with that. On to patient care coordination. How are we doing for time? I think we have about 15 minutes left. So there are, again, 8 profiles that are defined in patient care coordination: clinical mapping, guidelines, appropriate ordering, dynamic care planning, and care team management, point of care, device tracking, query for data on mobile, reconciliation of clinical content and care providers, and remote patient monitoring. So CMAP, it's there to translate terminology from one system to another. I can think of many times when I worked in a hospital where I had my local hospital as well as my regional repository of imaging to my provincial repository of imaging, and every time we went between layers, what I called the chest x-ray, they called x-ray of the chest. And it became very complicated to relate procedures from one level to another, and not only between me and peer hospitals, but also me to the regional and national architecture. So CMAP allows you to do some of this mapping between code systems to make sure that you can line up what code lines with what code on the other side. Guideline appropriate ordering, really to support the communication of the decision support guidance on whether an order is appropriate. So if someone comes in to the ER department with complaints of a really sore leg, and if you order an arm x-ray, maybe that wasn't appropriate. That's probably a very simplistic use case. There are lots more complex use cases, but in a lot of jurisdictions now, if you order the wrong thing, you don't get paid for it. So if you actually go forward and image the patient or do whatever you're doing, you might not actually be remunerated. So this is helping to address that by making sure that what you're doing is appropriate for the patient's care. Again, using a number of FHIR resources up in the top right that are listed there. Dynamic care planning. So this is the structures around creating care plans so that should a patient present with possible pneumonia, here are the steps to actually the patient has to follow. Order them a chest x-ray, get them started on some kind of antibiotic to really drive what that care plan actually is. And there's actually a FHIR resource called Care Plan, and then you can subscribe to those care plans as they get changed. A patient has a care team, so you think about they might have physicians, they might have nurses, they might have family caregivers, people at home. This care team management can be specified using FHIR, where you can discover what care teams are available, create or update them, line them up with patients as well. You can manage that with the ACTM profile. Point of care medical device tracking. So this is really looking at how do you close the loop between medical devices and the where the information around that. You can really not really see the transaction in that one. Query for existing data on for mobile. So this supports querying of clinical data elements, so observations of allergies, and making them available to other systems within and across enterprises. This relates to the document extraction of these values, but really they were focusing a little more on the cross-enterprise use cases. They, again, because of the mobile aspects, they're geared towards these resource and platform-constrained devices like tablets, smartphones, and embedded devices at the bedside, as an example. Reconciliation of clinical content and care providers. So this is where you've got information replicated from system to system, and being able to check what information is duplicated, which ones overlap one another, which ones conflict. Because if you've got, patient is positive for this in one system and negative in another system, you need to be able to correlate that and get those issues worked out. And then last one is remote patient monitoring. So this is being able to get measurements from these home care devices from an outside location into your health record. This doesn't use FHIR itself, it's using FHIR profiles that they've defined. Pharmacy, there are two profiles in pharmacy. The first is on mobile medication administration. This is covering the use case here is that imagine if you had an app for the patient. He could use the MMA profile to say what drugs am I supposed to be on, when do I take them, and then be able to provide reminders to that patient and be able to track compliance. Are they actually taking their medications? The MMA profile is what defines that. And it's using medication request, and medication administration FHIR resources for that. And then the second is uniform barcode processing. This is really to standardize the information that's coming off of barcodes and be able to reconcile that against a standard way of describing what's in that barcode. And the last group is quality research and public health. There are two profiles here. The first is mobile retrieve form for data capture. This is using Smart on FHIR to acquire information. So it's not actually using, it's using a bundle for FHIR resources and then other things under the hood. But it's really around this capturing data in forms about the patient. And then the second is this vital records death reporting, using FHIR to communicate when someone has died to various systems and tracking those various interactions, especially for things like disease surveillance, research purposes as well. So in conclusion, IHE is leveraging FHIR and DICOMweb. 23 profiles that I counted, and that's more than I counted 3 or 4 months ago. And it's always funny comparing notes when people say, "Oh, I heard there was 21." I've counted 23. So 8 in IT infrastructure, 8 in patient care coordination, 2 in pharmacy, 2 in the public health realm, and 3 in the radiology space. If you want to know more, there is a FHIR page on the IHE wiki, which is a great resource. It lists all the resources. I think I found more than what was on that page. As well as there's an index on how to apply FHIR in IHE. It's defined in Supplement Z in the ITI handbook. And then also there is other implementation material like samples that's using FHIR for these profiles in that directory there. There's a great blog done by John Murphy. I always remember, you can't spell Murphy without EHR, which is how I remember how to spell his last name. But there's a great article that he posted last August where he talked about IHE on FHIR and using STU3, which he went through a big update. A lot of CPs who actually bring up the IHE profiles to use STU3. A lot of thanks from various people. Harry Solomon, Kevin O'Donnell, Dr. Mendelson, John Dennison, Chris, David Kinson, John Elliott, and also the IHE website that helped me compile all this information. One thing that I can tell you, you should get involved. It's very exciting. There's lots of things going on, and you really get the sense of solving real-world problems using the standards that are being developed with HL7 DICOM and beyond. So you can go to IHE.net. The European Connectathon is coming up in The Hague in a couple of months. I've heard some exciting things about that while I've been at the show today. And then there's an IHE table where people are congregating around on IHE. So if you want to come find me, I've got a few more talks on FHIR and DICOMweb. And on Friday we're going to be experimenting with some DICOM tools. And otherwise, reach out. You can find me. I'll be here at the show all week. You can tweet at me. Find me on LinkedIn. Does anyone have any questions? That was a lot of content in 40 minutes. Yeah.
Question on if you look at the FHIR documentation, it's also explained for different resources how they should be used together with other resources. So how do the IHE profiles relate to these recommendations?
So a lot of if you look at some of the FHIR profile, like in the IHE profiles, they actually spend a lot of time detailing out how FHIR is being used. And they actually have a relatively standard section listing the resources and the level of resource that is being leveraged in that profile. So you'll say, looking at the medication ones, do we have medication and it's currently on STU3, and you can make that correlation. And they describe that. And what we've tended to see is the people involved on the IHE side are actually really heavily involved on the HL7 committees to bring that knowledge back in. I'm sure that there are discrepancies, especially as we move closer to release 4, that there need to be some changes, but because of the way that they're profiling the FHIR resources, that's generally kept in sync, I'd say.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So this is, most of these profiles are written by, I guess, IHE International or IHE US, I don't know how that works. Is it true, or can IHE affiliates write their own profiles, or would they use the international profiles and change them, or do they do both, or what do the affiliates do, the national IHE organization?
They can certainly participate. As an IHE member, I mean, I just happened to, someone said, hey Brad, you should look at this XDSI thing, maybe we can do something better with FHIR. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to give it a crack at it. And I actually sat down and started joining the calls and helped to write the profile. And I was joining the IHE international calls while they're going through that process. But the individual country members can do this, like they can participate as well. But I think, and I haven't been too involved on the national side, but their role is to help drive adoption within their jurisdictions and also provide feedback to IHE International as they develop some of these profiles as well. So I think it's kind of multifaceted in terms of their involvement.
So could a jurisdiction develop their own IHE profiles, or would that be the thing to do?
The answer I always get from IHE, no.
Okay.
From the Dutch IHE.
From the Dutch IHE?
Yeah.
There is a volume on national extensions, but I think that they come through the national organizations, and then it comes up to those committees because they're the ones who are the editors of the supplements. I haven't been involved in where that's happened. In radiology, which is where I've been spending most of my time, I don't even think that there's very many extensions. If there are, they're from like 7, 8, 9 years ago before I was even involved. So, yeah.
So in Switzerland, we made IHE profiles on a national level, and we are trying now to bring them to the international level. And as a county organization, you don't have voting rights, but you can engage in the process. So you have to get member into IHE International.
Okay. Makes sense. I've been involved with the Canadian group and how we've been able to get some of the profiles that were really important on that space on things like foreign exam management, which is one of the profiles that I'm working on for the 2017-2018 year. So, yeah.
So how are the profiles used in real life? Are the like real like app developers following those, or how do we enforce those, or like what the adoption rate is for those profiles?
Yeah. So what's kind of interesting is that it's a really from the far end, at the end of the process, is really market driven. And so what you'll find, having gone through it first as a guy who sends out RFPs when I was a customer, and then as someone who receives RFPs and answers questions for customers, I'm asked to say, do I support this profile, this profile, this profile? And if I don't, I might be knocked out of the RFP competition. So they're really using this as a leverage to get this interoperable software out there. So it would be difficult, I'd say, for an EMR to say, as a customer buying an EMR, I'd like to support FHIR. Sure, I could use, I could pick the most boring FHIR resource and say, yeah, I can do practitioner. That's, what do you want? You don't want patient data, do you? What the profiles in IHE are able to do is say, this is the problem that we want to solve, and we want to solve it with multiple vendors, should we want to create this interoperable solution. So each vendor has to commit to be able to say, yes, I do this use case for you. Yes, I'm doing the job as the image manager. I'm not doing anything else. That's my job. And people can be ranked and scored against that. And if you're buying lots of software, you can say, well, I've got this guy who does image manager, and I've got this guy who's image source, and I've got this guy who's an image client. I will have a working system at the end of the day, in theory. Usually it works out, but sometimes there's nuances as there are with any standards. Any other questions? I'm here all week.
Maybe not a question. Maybe not a question,
yeah,
but
sure.
a remark. I'm from IHE the Netherlands. Online you have a website where you can find use cases where IHE profiles are used and which vendors are involved in those use cases. So you can find a lot online and ask for procurement for vendors. Have you been tested for these profiles, for these use cases? And certification is also now in place within IHE.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can hold people to account. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.